Recently, I was watching an interview with Rhett of the very popular YouTube channel Good Mythical Morning, and it got me thinking about this topic. Rhett was raised as a Young Earth Creationist. I was also raised as a Young Earth Creationist, so I thought I'd take a minute to talk about it for anyone who doesn't know about it or is curious. Young Earth Creationism is the belief that the universe and all life on Earth was created by God in 6 days, less than 10,000 years ago, and that God created Adam and Eve and Noah's flood was a real event. Young Earth Creationism is based on the book of Genesis. It begins with the story of God creating everything. Though the beginning of Genesis does seem rather fantastic, it involves a talking snake, which was later interpreted as the devil, people living to be over 900 years old, and a giant flood to punish mankind's wickedness. But in other ways, it feels like it's being written as actual history, with real people. For example, Genesis has a remarkable amount of detail about who was the father of who, and how old they were when their child was born.
Genesis 5. This is the written account of Adam's family line. When Adam had lived 130 years, he had a son in his own likeness, in his own image, and he named him Seth. After Seth was born, Adam lived 800 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Adam lived a total of 930 years, and then he died.
Back in the 1600s, Bishop Ussher searched through the Bible, and using verses like this, he constructed a timeline. His calculation was that God created everything in 4004 BC. You can do this yourself and come up with similar numbers, although some sources have calculations that vary by a few hundred years. Other famous people like Johann Kepler and Isaac Newton did the same calculation and came up with different but similar dates. Now, based on these calculations, Noah's flood would have happened around 2200 to 2500 BC. We'll come back to this in a few minutes. Most young Earth creationists believe that dinosaurs existed with Adam and Eve. As you can see here, they create artwork in creationist children's books involving people and dinosaurs existing peacefully. Now, one thing I want to point out here in this picture is the dinosaurs eating plants. The dinosaur shown here is a Carnotaurus, which literally means meat-eating bull. According to most young Earth creationists, all the animals were vegetarian until after the flood. So that dinosaur with big sharp teeth, it was just eating plants, according to them. It's actually pretty surprising how many Americans are young Earth creationists. Gallup has been asking this question for the past 40 years, and it's right around 40%. Over that time, there's been a slight decline in young Earth beliefs and a modest increase in non-theistic evolution numbers, but the percentages haven't changed a whole lot in the past 40 years. There's a similar percentage of Americans who believe that humans and dinosaurs existed at the same time. 41% of Americans say that humans and dinosaurs definitely or probably existed at the same time. If you think about it, there's some obvious problems here. If all the animals were vegetarian before Noah's flood, then why are some animals so well designed to kill each other? Why do snakes have fangs and venom? Why do spiders have venom and build webs? Is it to catch leaves in their web? Why do sharks have mouths full of sharp teeth? Were they feeding on seaweed? Why can cheetahs run 70 miles an hour if not to chase down prey? Cats, and I mean everything from house cats to lions and tigers, are incapable of surviving on a vegetarian diet because their bodies aren't capable of producing the nutrients they need to survive on a vegetarian diet. Cats will literally die without meat, or at least a bunch of supplements. And why does a scorpion have a stinger and a venomous tail? Like Rhett, I started asking questions about this stuff. I even read some creationist books, none of which were terribly convincing. I remember one of them made this argument that the Earth and our solar system were special because no other planets had been found around other stars. Shortly after that book was published, scientists started finding planets around other stars. Now, there's a bunch of different sciences that provide evidence for evolution in an old Earth, although they are more complicated because they require knowing some stuff about biology and the fossil record. But back then I was working with what I knew, and I started to wonder how these biblical timelines lined up with history. As I mentioned earlier, according to the Young Earth Creationist timeline, Noah's flood would have happened sometime around 2200 to 2500 BC. But that doesn't make a lot of sense. We know the history of early civilization, and they're older than this. The famous pyramids of Giza are dated to around 2500 BC, and there are pyramids older and younger than them. The oldest pyramids date to around 2800 BC, and the Egyptians continued building pyramids for thousands of years. And there are written records about what pharaohs were in power for thousands of years. Are we supposed to believe that a global flood happened, but these ancient civilizations somehow continued uninterrupted? Even if you believe that some pyramids were built before the flood, you'd expect a gap of maybe 1,000 years before the population would be large enough to accomplish these kinds of things again. It seemed hard to believe that historians were completely wrong about history, or that they were involved in some conspiracy to hide evidence. It seemed to me that the most likely explanation was just that young Earth creationism was wrong. And that's just from a historical standpoint. We haven't even gotten into the evidence from other fields of science, like geology, plate tectonics, biology, genetics, fossils, radiometric dating, or astronomy. Why do people still believe in young Earth creationism? Well, for people who read their Bible, a casual reading of Genesis seems like it's recounting actual history, especially with all the genealogical details. Also, a lot of people are just raised in it, and people tend to just believe what they were raised to believe. Especially in more conservative and evangelical churches, the pastor probably tells them that this is the biblical truth, and that evolution is either wrong or a lie. People trust their pastor because he's a good guy and he seems knowledgeable about the subject. Plus, everyone around them believes in young Earth creationism, so it's probably correct, right? It's also possible for people to be caught in a creationist information bubble, where their church teaches it, and maybe they go to a Christian school that teaches it, and all their friends and family believe it. They're taught that creationism is true and obvious, but scientists don't want to admit it. They're also taught a lot of straw man arguments against evolution. I remember growing up and being told that Noah's Ark had been found on Mount Ararat, or that a dinosaur had been spotted in the jungles of Africa. We were told that scientists are quietly abandoning evolution and an old Earth because there are too many problems with it. The implication being that in a few years, nobody, not even the scientists, would actually try to defend evolution or an old Earth anymore. And all this creationist evidence was about to appear. This is decades ago that they told me this, by the way. It kind of reminds me how, during war, governments will tell their soldiers that the other side is just about to collapse, or that a new superweapon would suddenly turn the tide of war. In this analogy, evolution is about to collapse, and their superweapon of finding Noah's Ark and having all the proof that they need is about to happen. People generally don't go looking for evidence that might conflict with their existing beliefs. So young Earth creationists isn't going to be looking for evidence that they're wrong. And if somebody isn't looking for the evidence, then all the evidence in the world isn't going to convince that person. Even when people ask this question, they're likely to find creationist literature on their own, or maybe their pastor will direct them to creationist apologetics. And as Rhett discovered, it can cause huge problems with a person's community. If someone starts learning about evolution and doubting creationism, it can put them at odds with their church and their family. In Rhett's case, it became a dirty little secret which threatened to ruin his career, his relationships, and his marriage. I know when I was learning about evolution, it wasn't something that I talked about with anyone. I just didn't want that argument. So I think a lot of people just prefer to let sleeping dogs lie rather than make an effort to learn something that could make their life worse. Now, I'm not going to go through all the creationist literature, that would take too long, but for those who are curious, I'm ending the video with some images from creationist literature.